My apologies, I didn't put the microphone on. I'll start again. I saw you, Vicky, looking strange. Right. May I welcome all members and officers to the hybrid meeting of the Education Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Just to remind members, this meeting is able to be viewed live by members of the public and press today. Therefore, may I welcome anyone that may be watching remotely. A recording of this meeting will be made available on the Council's YouTube channel after the meeting has concluded, should anyone else wish to view it. Just to confirm, as a Council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that I have not received any notifications or requests to use Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. As a reminder, may I remind members to refrain from using the chat facility and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when they want to speak. And please could you keep your microphones muted when not talking so there aren't any interruptions encountered. Moving on to the agenda, declarations of interest. Can I ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they have any declarations of interest to declare? Councillor Best.
No interest to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Cowles.
None that I'm aware of at this stage, no, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Jones, Janet Jones.
None that I'm aware of, Chair.
Councillor Nick Jones is not here. Councillor Price is absent. Councillor Steve or myself, no, not that I'm aware of at the moment. Councillor Colette Thomas.
Not that I'm aware of at the moment, thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Councillor Watkins.
Governor at Our Ladies of the Angels in Cwmbran.
Councillor Williams.
Governor at Woodlands Primary and at Pontnewydd Primary.
And Vicky Hawler.
Governor at Ascol Planteg.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Chair, I'm also Governor of the Glenavon Heritage School.
Thank you. Just to remind, that's going on to agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of October 2022. Just to remind members, these minutes relate to the report we received on the Post-Inspection Action Plan, specifically Estin's recommendations 2 and 3 on improvement to self-evaluation and improvement processes within education. Please could I ask members to confirm that the minutes are an accurate account of the meeting, and if anyone is against or wishes to abstain, please can you confirm now, please? No, I'll take those as approved then. Thank you very much. Takes us on to the action sheet, which members, can you confirm that if they have any questions or whether they are happy with the action sheet? Similarly, if anyone is against or wishes to abstain, please can you confirm now? There was one on the bottom of the action sheet. Sorry. I was just going to check that all members have had a copy of the PR. Yeah? Thank you. Okay. So the action sheet, any questions? No? Thanks very much. That takes us to agenda item 5, which is a pupil attendance and persistent absence report. The purpose of this report is to inform members on the contents the current situation of low attendance and persistent absenteeism within our schools, and to highlight the actions and steps being taken to address these issues identified by the local authority. May I welcome Andrew Powells, Deputy Director of Learning, and Andy Rothwell, Assistant Head of Learning, and Louise Day, the Corporate Communications Manager, to the meeting. And I'm going to go straight to Louise, because she has a report to give us on the Not In Miss Out campaign. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, bear with me.
So I'm here to talk to you about the Not in Miss Out campaign, which is a 5-month communication campaign to support the education team and schools to improve attendance across the borough. For context, prior to the pandemic, school attendance in Torfaen was broadly similar to attendance rates across Wales. But between October 2019 and October 2022, average attendance at both primary and secondary schools has reduced. And the Welsh Government is currently updating their policy and guidance around school attendance. The objectives of the campaign is for the communications team to share at least one Not in Miss Out post a week on the Council's corporate social media channels, for schools to share posts linked to the campaign every month, for us to feature individual schools that highlight the positive action they are taking to improve the attendance and support the campaign. Following meetings with the Education Welfare team, it showed that the reasons for absenteeism across the borough are now more complex than prior to the pandemic, particularly with regards to persistent absenteeism, with more pupils and parents reporting issues with mental and emotional ill health. This campaign is targeted specifically at those pupils who take ad hoc unauthorised days off, for example, to go on holiday. It's also aimed at those families who haven't got back into the habit of going to school regularly since the pandemic. And for those who are struggling, it signposts them to appropriate support. The strategy is to run a 5-month campaign from November to the start of the Easter holidays to support schools to reduce unauthorised absences. The focus is very much on positive messaging, reinforcing the varied benefits of going to school every day, with the exception of authorised absences. The aim is to put Torfaen schools at the heart of the campaign by using images of real pupils from real schools, and to encourage and support schools to create their own content for their social media channels, digital class platforms and websites. And we're supporting them by the following. We've created banners and posters designed for both primary schools and secondary schools, which have now been delivered to all schools across the borough. We've produced digital assets, so for example, social media graphics, website banners and Teams backgrounds. We've also put together a social media toolkit for both primaries and secondaries with kind of advice on how and what to post, and we'll also send updated suggestions monthly. We've also produced social media videos and vox pops in both English and Welsh, which they can use, and we will be running monthly features on individual schools. We'll be producing press releases, and we'll also be offering them digital and social media support. Here's an example of the basis of the design for primary schools. These are pupils, I believe, from Llanwraven Primary School. And here's an example of the secondary school design, and these are pupils from Abersychan Comprehensive School. We've also produced this short social media video that highlights some of the different benefits of going to school regularly, from the first day of primary school through to the end of secondary school. Obviously no sound. Sorry, bear with me.
They say school days are the best of your life. Here are some reasons why.
We love our dress-up days.
I love learning to read with my teachers.
I love playing football at break time.
I enjoy playing football in school as well.
I love science lessons. They blow my mind.
I love drama and performing on the stage.
And I like the technical side of working backstage.
I love the programmes that our school has to offer, such as Prince's Trust.
Not in school? Then miss out on this and much, much more.
Not in Miss Out!
That film was recorded in Llanrafn Primary and Abersychan School. We also filmed the Welsh language version in Ysgol Bronyn and Ysgol Gyfan Gwynllw. Thank you for inviting me to present the campaign to you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you, Louise. Any questions on that campaign at this moment in time? I don't think we've... I think it's quite snappy. I think it's really good. I watched it on the council's website, and it came through quite well, I thought. Snappy, not too long, so people can not get bored or what have you. But, so is that going to be played in every school?
We've provided it to all schools. We wanted to kind of, I suppose, use it as inspiration, really, and we're hoping to encourage them to do their own videos along similar lines. And that's part of the work that we'll be doing now over the next few months, is encouraging and supporting. But they do have access to it. We also recorded Vox Pops in each of the schools we went to, which are short interviews with pupils and teachers talking about why they miss going to school if they can't go. So we'll run those again, but the idea is that it inspires schools to produce their own content for their own parents and pupils.
Thank you very much, Louise. You're welcome to stay. And now I'd like to ask both Andys, please, to give us a brief overview of the main points of the report, please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Powles, I'm Deputy Director for Education. So just to give you an overview of what's happened in the department over the last couple of months. So Andy's post is a new post that's been created as Assistant Head of Education, so it's additional resource in the department. One of the areas of the focus is to improve attendance, so it includes line management of the Education Welfare Service. Recognise that this additional resource was needed because attendance needs a particular focus. Attendance in Torfaen at the moment is notably below where we were before the pandemic, but that's the same in every local authority within Wales. And we had a recent regional meeting, and it's a similar concern, particularly across the South East Wales Consortium. So we're working together as well as the independent work we're doing within Torfaen. There's a lot of work that's already happened. Andy was only recruited and started a month ago. Within that month, we've had the campaign start. We're having much better data analysis and reporting of the work, of the data within individual schools, looking at persistent absenteeism, so that's learners have got 80% attendance or below, as well as the overall rates of attendance. We're also starting to do a much deeper and formal analysis of the use of attendance codes within schools. We know that the Welsh Government guidance exists. It's complicated. It relies on the consistency of approach within a school and within individual classes. Some of the key concerns we've got at the moment are use of holidays or holidays being taken within term time. We know that there's some families who have had holidays postponed because of the pandemic, and we know that they're reporting to schools that they're taking it over this term. That can only last for a certain amount of time. We need the learners in school, we need them safe, we need them progressing. The other element we're experiencing is emotionally based school non-attendance. So it's the impact of the pandemic on the mental health and well-being of learners. You know, education welfare and our educational psychology service are reporting increased cases of non-attendance linked to pupil well-being. So I don't really want to talk through the details of the paper that's been circulated in advance. Just want to reassure you at this point, this is a significant priority for the department. We are tracking attendance on a monthly basis and sharing that with schools. It's informing the work of education welfare officers and other teams across the council. This is not solely an education issue. This cuts across everybody, and it's a multi-agency responsibility. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. I think we recognise that and getting that message over that it's everybody's business. I keep repeating it. Education is everybody's business, and we need everybody to be working towards our aims. So. Okay, so thank you very much, and we'll go into the questions. I think everybody has the sheet circulated that we put together yesterday, so I'll kick off with the first question. and it is, what are the main factors influencing pupil absence in schools today?
Yeah. So key factors at the moment are illness. There's significant illness around. COVID is still around, along with other bugs. Plus, as just mentioned, it's emotionally based school non-attendance and use of holidays, parents taking holidays in term time. So in terms of the holiday aspect, one thing we would like to reintroduce is the use of fixed penalty notices. That's a tool it's a tool. It's not a blanket tool to be used, and it's at the discretion of individual schools whether they do use it. Fixed penalty notice can be used where there's a level of unauthorised absence. It is a fine, and the fine increases if it's not paid within a certain amount of time. We don't want to use these. I think that's, we recognise the challenge of finances at the moment. However, the well-being and safeguarding of learners and their entitlement to an education is also a priority. So we would like to introduce them, but also be really clear with schools these need to be used appropriately and it's not a blanket tool. Those are the key reasons for non-attendance.
Thank you. Councillor Cowles. Oh, I'm apologies.
Chair, Councillor Williams has the next question.
The first one was quite short. Sorry, Lucy.
It was interesting reading through the report. I noted on, I think it's 4.8 that there was like a distinct link between pupils, schools with larger pupil development grants, and they're the schools that tend to have that trend of lower attendance rate and high persistence absenteeism. So I guess the question, it's like, have you identified particular schools across Torvine with that trend? And is there a kind of particular monitoring of those, what particular support is going into those schools?
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, it's absolutely a good question and you're spot on. There is a trend, a very close link at the moment between schools with higher EFSM and higher attendance or lack of attendance. So in terms of identifying those schools, yes, we've got that. We're not going to put it out in the public domain, but we've got that data. We've grouped schools according to essentially a 2% quartile or grouping, and we can see where the trends are with those schools. Right. From that, we've been able to. Every school gets a core entitlement of support from EWO services, but where the need's greater, we can deploy additional resource or focus around those schools. For some of those schools, they've got specific action plans that we're supporting the school with, so the head teacher, but also the attendance clerk, the people who are managing wider systems, making contact with parents, supporting them with those processes and trying to make sure that they're as good as they can be, with a view that, depending on the level of support, hopefully we'll see an impact and an improvement, and then we can sort of descale our support and put it. We've only got a finite amount of resource, haven't we? So we just need to be smart about how we're using that. Yeah. But yeah, to be reassured, yes, we do have a very clear picture of the individual schools and how they're treatment.
Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of that data tracking, at the moment we're comparing performance against October 2019 pre-pandemic data. So the latest we've done is October 22 to October 2019, and at the moment all of our schools had a lower rate of attendance than they did in 2019. The majority of those were within 5%, so they were up to 5% lower than they were in 2019. There are a very few schools who are more than 7.5 percentage points below where they were previously, and they are schools of particular focus. As Andy said, we're tracking within 2.5 percentage point brackets and making sure that the resource is targeted to those that most need it.
No questions online? Councillor Cowles.
Thank you, Chair. You touched on this in answer to the first question, but what's the current process and with the issuing of fixed penalty notices, and have we issued any in Torvine to date?
Okay, so Torvine has never issued a fixed penalty notice. So at the moment, we're building the system that needs to be in place in order for schools to request their usage. In my experience, it's often the warning notice that's issued before the fixed penalty notice which has the impact on a family. And that's what I hope would be the case in Torvine, that with a large amount of support directed at individual families, that actually we would never have to get to a fixed penalty notice. Then it would be a warning, and again, I hope that would be enough. However, that the option is going to be there for schools to use it for those specific cases. The other part to remember is that the Education Welfare Service have the option of progressing a formal prosecution for non-attendance. Again, this is not something we ever want to do. We want to work with families. We want to support them. We recognise the challenges. However, just go back to that point, that it is an entitlement for all learners to have access to a quality education. And if there are family reasons that are within control that are preventing that, this is an option for us.
I was only just going to add to that, before we can even get to the process of thinking about using fixed penalty notices, schools need to have those conversations at a governing body level and agree what that might look like. And one of the things that we potentially might be suggesting to schools to consider is working in clusters, working within their cluster to look at what would a cluster approach to the use of a formal warning notice be. Because that will, I think, help parents in terms of the consistency of understanding from starting school all the way to progressing and leaving formal education. So it needs to be in a school's attendance policy. It needs to be ratified and agreed by the governing body, and it will also need to be a message will need to be circulated via a school newsletter or on the website, specifically informing parents that the school's governing body have agreed to the use of fixed penalty notices. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Can you tell us what other local authorities are doing regarding PFNs and what is their strategy?
I'll start. I think Andrew might want to jump in and continue. So across South East Wales, there's an agreed protocol for the use of fixed penalty notices. So that includes the 5 local authorities that make up the South East Wales Consortium. That's ultimately the strategy or policy that we would like to introduce here for that consistency across the region. In terms of usage, I'm probably not in other local authorities. I'm probably not in the strongest place to talk about that because I'm fairly new in role. I am very aware that one of our neighbouring local authorities has since September been using them, and that there have been some positive impacts of just using the informal warning notice linked to that already. Andrew, I don't know if there was anything else. No.
Question 5, Vicky Horner, please.
Morning, everyone. So my question here is, where does the money that was received from the fixed penalty notices, where would that go? Does it go centrally into the local authority? Does it go into the education? How's that money going to be used?
Yeah, there can be a small element that's retained by the local authority for admin charges linked to the issuing of fixed penalty notices. The rest would go back to Welsh Government.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas, question 6.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to safeguarding, just wondered whether there's any sort of multi-agency working. Some time ago, there used to be a very close relationship with our community support of community police officers and the education welfare officers, where they would sort of seek out children who perhaps were not in school, and there would be a joint partnership. I wondered whether there's any plans to do something similar.
Okay, so truancy sweeps, I've previously run those in a different local authority in collaboration with the police. We haven't got that planned here at the moment, so previously, it would be the Education Welfare Service work closely with police to run them. It's the challenge of the resource in police time as well as officer time. It's not something we've explored here yet, but it's something we would do in the future. Yeah. In terms of other multi-agency working, Andy?
I think picked up in some of the cameos towards the back of the report, some examples of multi-agency working, but that's where the real power lies in this. It's sharing intelligence and information, working with schools and communities, working with various service areas across the local authority, sharing those conversations, and I suppose ultimately leading that towards a process of ensuring that children are safeguarded appropriately. So where we're seeing concerns, escalating those concerns appropriately and quickly. But that isn't just the role of an EWO, it's a shared responsibility that we all have.
I remember we had a sweeping Cumbrae Town Centre and we picked up most of Aberglenny schools. So,
can I come back on
yeah.
that? Can I just say, can I thank the officers for the cameo pieces at the back, the issues there. They really appreciate it, very, very useful, and it did really give a good picture of what the work that's going on. I don't think we've had that before, so thank you very much. Very welcome.
If that's okay, I'll feed that back to the team because they worked quite hard on producing those, and I felt that it really helped to bring the document to life. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Useful. Sorry. Okay. Councillor Williams, question 7.
Actually, that follows on really neatly from what my colleague was saying. Those cameos were incredibly useful, and it kind of gives a bit of meat to my question, because I was looking at the cameos demonstrated just the amount of energy, time, commitment with those particularly complex situations. And I was looking at the number of education welfare officers, 7, to cover such a wide area. So clearly there must be some kind of recruitment and retention issue, or I'm asking, is there? And are there particular plans to kind of increase that or support the work that they're doing? Because it's clearly crucial, but extremely resource and time consuming. So that's the question. How is that going to develop going forward?
One of the key things we want to do is to have consistency in schools of approach, and actually building capacity at school level. There's 7 officers to cover many thousand learners. So we know the first thing we need to do is make sure that all schools are clear on their processes, that they're appropriate, and that schools are actually delivering that effectively. Then there's the multi-agency working. So officers regularly work with staff from Families First or Children's Services, because it's the same family, and we don't want several agencies working on sort of the same family with slightly different aspects. So there's no plan to increase the EWS service at the moment, but we just want to make sure that they're working smart, and that that there's that team around the family approach, that there's one voice working with the family, and that's an agreed multi-agency approach, and that schools are consistent and comprehensive in the way that they're tracking and monitoring attendance. Yeah.
I think the communities can help as well, because I live in a direct line to my school, and the issues that I see is that pupils are going into school but then leaving school during the school day at some time. And whether that's recorded or even the safeguarding issues are considered, I don't know. So, but the community very often ring, and especially ring me, saying there's some children hanging around a certain area, and I contact the school and it's dealt with. So there is a role for everybody again. You know, the community, the officers that are working in the school and the schools. So yeah, it's good. Apologies. Vicky Hall has got the next question. Question 8.
Thank you very much. So my question is, how is persistent absence currently defined?
Yeah, so that's people with below 80% attendance.
So unauthorised absences.
Not necessarily unauthorised. So it could be a mixture. So it could be have a persistent absenteeism, but it could be due to a medical issue. It could be unauthorised. It's that standard approach. It's below 80, because if a learner's below 80% attendance, whether it's authorised or not, we want to work with them. We want to make sure that they're accessing education and we can get them back as much as possible. We're in this situation now where there is the option of hybrid learning. There's education off-site, so that there's different ways of providing education rather than just being in school. For some of our learners who've got emotionally based school avoidance, with some of our settings are working with that, the mixture of online and face-to-face learning, trying to increase the hours. But yeah, 80%.
Just 80% attendance. Okay, thank you very much.
I'd like a supplementary on that. How much support is put in then if we've got issues of maybe ill health or persistent school avoidance, I would say. So how much support is put in then?
So I think, almost going back to something I said earlier, I think it's about targeting that support accordingly. So if we've got a child who is 80% or below, or even heading in that direction, we can see patterns and trends emerging. So getting in there early and understanding what the problem is and drawing on the idea of a multi-agency approach. If it's hard to give a defined answer to a general, but if let's take an example of a child with emotional needs, it might not just be that the EWO is working there. The school will have a role to play, the EWO will have a role to play, potentially education psychology might have a role to play in working with what is the best package of support that we can put together for that child at an individual level.
Thank you. Question 9, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, for those schools with very low attendance levels, how are we working with pupils to find out what the main issues are affecting them not wanting to go to school?
Yeah, I'll take that. It's a really good question. Again, it comes back to the role of the EWO officer, but also with the school attendance clerk or the school, perhaps pastoral lead, working with the individuals, with the individual families, and unpicking what it is that is the barrier to school, and then just working through a suite of solutions to find the answer to that. It was interesting, in March of this year, the Education Endowment Foundation, an organisation over the bridge in England, published a research-based report looking at interventions that have the most impact on getting children into school. And in there they talk around a range of things that work for pupils, but invariably it's not just one thing. So we're looking at maybe having something to look forward to when you get into school first thing in the morning, so an activity or an event that the child can look forward to. But equally it could be looking at rewards. Equally, it could be looking at, maybe we've got an episode of emotional-based an issue there. How can we jump that hurdle to get a child in? So I think it's around thinking about not just one thing, but looking at a range of interventions that we can use, and picking the right ones for the right child. That just finding the right match. But that's done with EWO at school, and then any other officer who might be required depending on the need of the situation. That's a sad situation. I'm not aware at the moment of a situation like that, but I'm probably a little bit too early in post to understand that. Okay. What should happen as part of the attendance strategy is a first day contact. So where a child hasn't turned up to school, and if no reason has been given by mum or dad or parents, carers, the school should be actively making contact with the family to find out the reason for non-attendance. You'd like to think as just a first point of contact that would have picked that issue up.
I just think at that time that people was let down. I think at that time that the whole family felt quite let down. It's been resolved and she's happy now, but it was an incident which was, you know, quite sad, really.
I've got the next question, question 10, which is how we've seen the Not In Miss Out campaign. So how will we ensure effective communication and collaboration with parents and the wider school community on the Not In Miss Out campaign to ensure there is a collective understanding of our expectations?
So as part of the information that we've made available for schools, we've suggested how they can promote the campaign among their own pupils, families and communities. We think that they are best placed to work out what will work for their particular communities and demographics. We're too far removed to dictate. So we've made some suggestions. As I said, you know, we sent all our branding to schools. So hopefully, wherever you are in the borough, you will see the same branding and there is that consistent message. And we've also offered to go into schools to offer them help on conveying the campaign message. As we said, we provided digital and social media assets, but often schools will write to parents, they'll write with newsletters. So as part of the work we'll be doing with schools, we will be suggesting that they use the key messages of the campaign if they write to parents regarding attendance. So again, those key messages that are going across.
Are we combining the Not In Miss Out with the Strive for 95 as well? Is that running alongside, or have we forgotten Strive for 95 and just go with the Not In Miss Out campaign?
Well, when we initially were approached by the Education and Welfare Service to support schools, we instantly went back to the Strive for 95 because, you know, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But during conversations with them, some schools particularly, but I think all schools are quite away from 95%, so it felt somewhat of too much of an ambitious place to start. But also given the context that we're living in at the moment with an awful lot of pressure on families, whether that's post-COVID, whether it's ill health, whether it's financial. We felt as a team that actually having positive messages would kind of counteract that a little bit, but also support schools. Obviously, it's quite hard for them to keep waving the stick, but actually we thought let's take it from a different approach and celebrate what schools do and celebrate the sense of community. We did run this by the schools, and they liked it. So that's what we went for.
Can I follow?
Jane.
Thank you. Can I just ask as well then, so you said that you're encouraging the schools to write out to parents and to include it in the messaging to parents, but isn't the campaign aimed at the children, at the pupils? So have you recommended how they're going to get that message out to pupils who aren't in school? So how are they going to contact them?
The campaign is primarily aimed at pupils who perhaps have got out of the habit of routinely going to the school. So we are not communicating with parents and families who have significant reasons for not being in school, whether that's medical reasons or psychological or emotional reasons. We don't feel that a comms campaign can really deal with that. Obviously, the work that Andy and Andrew are doing are there to support those families. We're not recommending particularly that schools write to parents, but they do contact parents either through parent newsletters or put things on their website. So, you know, I think if they are writing about attendance broadly, then using the key messages of the campaign will get that element of it across. But we are being quite specific because from a communication campaign, you know, we can't help people override quite challenging situations. The campaign is based on, you know, as I said, people who've got out of habit, people who may, you know, decide to take some time off for a reason that would fall under unauthorised reasons. And, you know, as schools are doing a lot already within their environments for pupils, you know, attendance awards or, you know, special treats for classes who've got high attendance. So, you know, they are doing that anyway, and what we're doing is trying to support them with the work they're already doing.
Thank you.
Vicky, question 11.
Thank you, Chair. So, with reference to what you mentioned earlier about the fixed penalty notices being the discretion of the school about a level of unauthorised absence and not a blanket tool, my question is there a consistent attendance process that is used throughout all schools in the borough?
So there is the Welsh Government guidance on the use of attendance codes and how they should be used. That's the national picture, so yes. Beyond that, they're developing the strategy, but it's very much up to individual schools how they want to approach it.
Somebody's microphone on? Okay, sorry.
Sorry, there was a bit of feedback then. Okay, so yes, so there's the national guidance, which and it is guidance for schools on how they should use the attendance codes. It's broken down into authorised and unauthorised codes. So there's the expectation schools are using that appropriately, and so that triggers the support that could be put in place. We are always going to focus on unauthorised absence because that's where the concern is. So if there are pupils with high levels of unauthorised unauthorised absence, that's when we'll be starting to work with schools to question what family engagement is on offer. Is it a curriculum offer that's actually not meeting the needs of their learners? Are they working with the right multi-agency support for those individual pupils that have an issue with attendance? So it's quite a hard question to answer in terms of if there's a national framework, but it all comes down to the individual reasons for the absence for that learner. We do have a self-evaluation audit tool for schools, which is just a quick check of are these key processes in place? Do all staff understand the absence codes? Is first day absence responses taking place for individual families? If they're going to use fixed penalty notices, has it been included in the newsletter? Is it updated in the policy for the school? Those kind of approaches. But again, it's a delegated responsibility to schools how they manage it. We just want to make sure they're doing it in line with the national guidance. Yeah.
Can I just come in? Just to add to that as well, it's mentioned in the paper, but the Welsh Government at the moment are in the process of redrafting and creating some updated guidance themselves. So whilst we are developing a strategy specific for Torfaen that relates to everything Andrew said, there is a possibility that we might need to revisit the strategy once Welsh Government have published their updated materials as well. We want to get on the front foot, right? We're not happy with where attendance is. We need a campaign. We need a new strategy or a refined strategy. We need to use the processes and powers that we've got available. It has to be built around positive momentum in schools, which is what the Not In This campaign is all about. But we are cognizant that there is going to be something from Welsh Government that potentially, it's not going to undercut it because it's the same principle. We get children in schools. We just need to make sure that our work is aligned to the thought process of national policy.
And I guess for me, my curiosity here was around, regardless of what school a pupil attends, they will get kind of equality to access of support services or kind of equality in the support initially, because I know that some schools have attendance officers, others don't, that will contact families, check in, is everything okay? Whereas a family at a different school might not have that level of connection and relationship with the schools. Hence why is there a kind of consistent attendance process throughout all the schools?
Yeah, I agree with you there. Different schools have different demographics with different needs, and they will have different levels of grant funding depending on their demographic, which might enable them to employ an attendance officer through a particular grant, etc. One thing I just really want to focus on is actually there's so much positive about being in school, and we often focus on the absence levels. We've got curriculum for Wales being introduced now. That's a fantastic development. It's about individual curriculums based on our local history and our local population. There's a real chance for learners to really direct the learning that they're being offered and experienced within school. got the expansion of the free school meal rollout. That's fantastic. Schools are warm, they are safe, they are nurturing. And that's what I really want to get that point across this morning, is like, let's focus on the positives about being in school and the hard work that the schools are doing.
I think you move a lot forward with positive information than the negative. So, okay, Councillor Jones, you've got the next question.
Thank you, Chair. How many children do we have in education at home, and how do we keep track of their progress?
We have those numbers. Okay. So, as across all of Wales, the numbers of elective home education learners has increased significantly over the last few years. In Torfaen, the total number in 2019-20 was 113. For the last academic year, it went up to 193. And the new requests were 53 new requests last year. The thing to bear in mind here, there are children who potentially never registered for school, so wouldn't be included in this because they were never on roll. And that's always a real concern for me, because they potentially have never had contact with the local authority, and that is a safeguarding risk. In terms of those who request to be electively home educated, schools will also know those families really well, and they will know if there's a safeguarding risk there. So they would have already had contact with children's services if there was a significant risk. Education welfare would already know if there was a significant risk.
Nothing more to add to that.
Vicky, I don't know whether you want you to ask your next question. It was very linked to the answers that we just had. So,
yeah, I think it's been answered. Yeah.
Thanks very much. The next one is Councillor Jones.
Sorry. In the absence of children, are there any specific groups, vulnerable groups like the travellers or anything, which account for high levels of absenteeism?
Okay, so generally there are those learners who come from more deprived background have higher rates of absence. That's a trend across Wales. Traveller communities, it's interesting because there's a specific traveller code within the Welsh Government guidance for marking absence linked to the traveller culture. It's very difficult to talk about because we're talking about small numbers of learners here to be a wider trend. But I feel most comfortable saying there is the code there in the guidance that recognises traveller children might have lower rates of attendance due to the lifestyle and moving around. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we've got a question on young carers. I was thinking bringing those into this conversation, but Councillor Watkins is the next question. Thanks.
Thank you. So you've probably touched quite a bit on this already, to be honest. But if a pupil is meeting the criteria for being persistently absent, what action does that generate? And then what stage does that move on to next? How does that process actually work? What does it look like?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, again, we'd like to think that we're picking up that child before we get to the stage of hitting the criteria of being persistently absent through that regular dialogue between schools and EWOs. Seeing patterns and trends emerge. Is there somebody who's been a persistent absentee previously, has regressed out and is back in school, and then, is there a likelihood that they might end up being a persistently absent pupil again? What does it look like? I think you're right, I've kind of covered that, but it's about the individual and understanding that individual's needs and the barriers for that pupil getting into school in the first place. Is it something that's around developing a reward for that child being in school? Is it helping that child to engage in some experiences in school first thing in the morning that they can look forward to? Is there an emotional need there that involves the educational psychologist input? The answer is in the sort of the detail of the situation that child finds himself in. The important piece of work is the preventative work with schools and EWOs and other multi-agency services in preventing that happening in the first place. So I hope that answers your question.
So who would make the decision as to who's most appropriate then to work with that child?
Ultimately, the schools, but we would advise in terms of EWO service would be there offering advice, suggesting we've got these people and we've got this service, but it would be driven by the school because they know the child best at the end of the day. Go ahead.
So yeah, there are the cameos in the back, which give some case studies. That we have had a learner recently who had been on the Child Protection Register, had come off the Child Protection Register, but we still had a lower rate of attendance. This child had medical needs as well, so there's a mixture of health service involvement with the family, there was family first involvement and education welfare. The trick with that case was about coordinating that support, so there weren't too much involvement, too many confusing messages for that family. Wanted to make sure that there was a voice that parents trusted, that they were engaged with the work, and that it was right for that parent and that child, the support. So there isn't a blanket answer.
I don't know whether this is a question for you or whether it's a question for the schools, but will there be any rewards or incentives offered to those pupils who've improved or maintained their attendance? When we had the mayor, we used to have presentations, particularly of either school forms or individuals that had really worked hard at attendance on the Strive to 95 scheme that we've run, and I just wonder whether or not, I know I've been in schools where they've had premierships, you know, and a World Cup is a good point at this moment in time, but yeah.
We haven't factored in incentives as part of this broader campaign. As you mentioned, as part of the Strive for 95, there were kind of council-based rewards for children. Again, this campaign has moved away from being kind of the success being deemed by a certain percentage. You know, there's been a lot of criticism about the expectation for 100%, given that, as we said, that, you know, the picture is a lot more complex now. What we have, the only thing we've provided to schools as part of this campaign is a most improved certificate, which again doesn't base success on a certain figure, but recognises improvement and a journey. Again, what schools do within their own schools is up to them, and I know a lot do initiatives, but from a campaign point of view, we've suggested that they recognise best improved rather than certain targets.
We tend to agree with that because, you know, those that are taking 100% attendance don't get any rewards at all yet. They should they? So, yeah, thanks. Okay, question 17, which is Councillor Thomas.
Are there any lessons that we learned from the Strive for 95 campaign, please?
Thanks, Councillor. I think when you look at what Estin said in their inspection report for local authority back in June, they recognised there that attendance in Torvine, in the context of a challenging socio-economic background, was actually good, and I think they used the word good. I think we've got to, you know, remember that the strategy was driving attendance at that point, the Strive for 95 attendance, and for Estin to recognise it as good tells its own story. It must have been successful. With the new strategy coming forward, and again with a nod to things may come from Welsh Government that slightly change the approach, a lot of the processes from the Strive for 95 campaign in terms of supporting schools over a long term, looking at preventative actions, as well as we're going to continue with some of those because they're good. We need to have flexibility in the system. Talking about being able to target resources in a smart way, where the need is greatest, that might be slightly different. But the fundamental process of first day contact, 3-day contact with EWOs, and I'd be happy to come and share the strategy when it's at a point for consultation. We've retained a lot of the really good stuff that's in there because Estin, you know, it did the job. It got the authority to a good place with its attendance. We need to get back there.
Assistant absentee
Question 18 is mine. Yeah, come in.
The one learning point for me is the persistent absenteeism. That was the comment within the Eston report, that the overall rates for attendance were strong compared to the Welsh average and compared to similar demographic LAs, but persistent absenteeism was higher than others. So that's where we need to particularly focus our support. And that's where the different tools that we want to make available to the schools might have more of an impact.
My question is, what is classed as legitimate authorised absence? I had a son who swam for Wales and he did the odd Friday or what have you. So are sporting activities classed as authorised absence, and is this consistent amongst most schools when they want to do something for their county or their country?
So Andrew might want to add to this, but the Welsh Government document highlights essentially what a school can and cannot authorise in terms of absence. From a sporting point of view, we believe that can be authorised. But it's just the interpretation of what's in Welsh Government coding and policy, and that has to be, again, for a school to agree. And we're promoting clusters to consider that. What is it at a cluster level that looks like? But it goes back to following Welsh Government guidance. Andrew,
and consistency again, so whether it's a blanket, everybody understanding the same thing.
From my perspective, I think the codes are really complicated. There's a lot of them. So that does raise a real challenge for consistency. Worked with the Welsh Government for a long time about revising the codes. There's been conversations about this for 5, 6, 7 years. So there is that real challenge. One thing that we're now doing on a monthly basis is tracking the use of attendance codes within schools. And where there are anomalies, if there are a large number of, C codes, T codes, with everyone, that will pose a question for the EWO. So why is your data so different to other schools? It might be a legitimate reason. If there are lots of authorised absences for sports, music, whatever it is, well, let's have that conversation with the school. Let's understand the rationale for it. And then, as Andy said, let's have at least a cluster approach. That would be great, so there's consistency there.
Okay. Question 19, I think, Colette, have you?
Yeah, that was
are you satisfied with that?
Guidance on the attendance codes. They were very complicated, and I just wondered, but you did answer my question. Thanks.
Yeah, we did also have that question ready for you, but yeah, might be something for us to recommend in recommendations. So, question 20 is Councillor Williams.
You've answered most of it. This is around a particular group of about young carers. So it's not so much, you very much answered about the support, but I was just wondering about capturing the information about young carers, how consistent that is across schools, because I know some schools, because when I was working in social care, that was often a group that was particularly difficult because children were very reluctant or weren't even aware that they had that role. So I'm just wondering about the consistency of capturing that information. Because I know some schools would include it specifically, some schools would include it just in the general group of vulnerable children. So just a little bit of understanding about that, capturing of that information.
I think that's an area for development. Just like, as you say, it's very difficult to capture. Do individuals identify as a carer? Are they willing to identify publicly as a carer? That's a real challenge. There has been work promoting the support and care for young carers. I don't know how we would identify that we've captured it effectively, because it's a bit like the elective home education learners who've never registered in a school. You don't really know. You don't know what you don't know. So. But it's something I think we recognise it needs to be strengthened. Yeah.
Sometimes young carers don't recognise that they're young carers. You know, when they grow up with a illness in the household or something. So, but I believe our youth service are doing some good jobs with the young carer support network that they have. So, yes.
Just as a tool for a way ahead, I know Carers Wales has done an awful lot of work on highlighting young carers, and I know a couple of primary schools have certainly bought into that and have, actually included specifically that group of children in looking at their, when they're looking at their school development plans to make sure that's captured. So I think there is that's a very good resource, I think, to actually work with Carers Wales and their young carer strategy would be good.
One of the things we're establishing is a attendance and wellbeing forum to share good practice across schools. So it'd be really interesting to know which of those schools are doing it really well, and we'll celebrate and share that practice.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Cowles?
Thank you, Chair. Would members be provided with the opportunity to contribute to the strategy as part of their work programme for 2023-24 prior to Cabinet approval?
I think that would be a really wise step, and we'd very much welcome your input. There's, collectively a lot of knowledge, experience and skill that can be offered, and the fact that many people here sat on governing bodies is, we really want to engage and we want it to be everybody's attendance strategy, not the local authorities, if you get my drift. So yeah, we would very much welcome that.
Thank you. Vicky Hall, question 22.
Thank you very much. Will a thorough review of the support services be carried out prior to the strategy being approved?
Can you clarify what do you mean? Which support services, and a review in what way?
So the understanding is that support services will be offered to families who experience persistent absenteeism, so through the EWO, probably youth service, health services. So just an understanding of the services that we have on offer for our families to access and what they're providing. So about that partnership working, are we going to review what we have on offer and how we implement it?
Thanks for that, Councillor. Yeah. So one of the things actually that the EWO team have done as part of the new strategy, a suite of materials and resources for schools, including sort of guidance around policy development, templates, etc., etc. But one of the key documents in there is exactly that, supporting services. So they've gone through and mapped out what supporting services are available, contact details, names, and it's just there for schools to use, EWOs to use, for again the specific circumstances that might arise. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks. I've got next question with 23. Research consistently reveals bullying as a major causal factor of pupils' absence. Are there clear linkages, therefore, between attendance and the anti-bullying strategies within schools? I had a case brought to me this week, actually.
Okay. Bullying will be a factor linked to school avoidance. We don't have specific data on that, but there's significant anti-bullying work that goes on. In fact, in Committee Room 2 and 3 right now, there are 20 school staff engaging in anti-bullying development work. This is another example where if there's an individual case that we know about, then the bespoke support will be put in place. So that could be through the Healthy Schools team, developing anti-bullying policies, positive wellbeing approaches within schools. It could be about working with that individual learner to look at the psychological basis of why they're avoiding school. So that's a long way of saying we don't have specific data on it, but anti-bullying work is high profile. There was the recent thematic review on sexually harmful behaviour within schools, and we know that across Wales that was identified as an issue. That's a joint piece of work that's being addressed by the Healthy Schools and the safeguarding teams within the local authority to make sure that it's a safe space for everyone. We're also keeping a much tighter track on the incidence of bullying within schools. We've updated the SIMS school, it's a computer system that's used to mark registers, so that can also be used to track where there are incidents and trends of bullying. The challenge on that is schools feeling comfortable to log it on that system. They are addressing bullying in schools, they absolutely are, but to log it in there, those schools actually recording systems better, it might look like they've got higher rates of bullying than other schools, when actually it's just they're more effective in recording. So that's the piece of work that we're working with them at the moment, is that this isn't about a penalty for identifying there's a bullying issue. Actually, we celebrate that you've addressed it, you identified it, we know what type of bullying it is, that if it's linked to a protected characteristic, okay, how can we work with you to improve curriculum provision within the school to address that?
Apologies. I didn't have my mic on then, but I just had a light bulb moment about a single point of contact that might be useful for reporting bullying. But, yeah.
That single point of contact for me is the head of year. It's a form tutor. It's someone who has the relationship with the learners. Having an external contact to the school that you might report a bullying issue to, that's really difficult for somebody to do. And then it would be to a person that the young person's never met. Whereas we want someone who actually understands the context of what their concerns are. I can work with them, the group of friends or other learners that they've got the issue to. So that's the model that we're approaching, is that schools are comfortable to identify where there's bullying, but also how to resolve it through restorative approaches, through curriculum. It needs to be a school-based level. Yeah.
I agree, but sometimes when they don't get a result from their reporting in schools, then they come to the councillor or the local authority to deal with it. And very often, I've had quite a few details where schools haven't taken action and they felt the need to go higher up or further on. There is a slight issue there that we need to be aware of. My next question is, how do we ensure that schools positively integrate those pupils who have been absent for a significant amount of time back into the school setting?
Okay. We have a modified day policy approach, which is actually going into consultation at the moment. And it's about that schools have a very clear picture of which learners are on a part-time timetable, a modified day, that it can last for no more than 6 weeks before it's reviewed, and that review takes place with the collaboration of the inclusion team. So we reckon this is particularly for those learners who've perhaps had school-based, emotionally based school non-attendance. It would be a very significant expectation to go to having no attendance to back in full-time. So it's about having a clear trajectory and expectation that this is going to happen at pace. This isn't something in the large that will take place over terms or years. We know that there's those learners that have got significant issues, and we need to have a mixed economy for their provision. They may not be in school full-time. They may be doing extended work experience. They may be going to college. They could be doing a whole range of alternative provision. So they may not be back in school full-time, but we want them to be in a provision full-time, and that's what this modified day protocol is working towards. We have a track of those learners. We know the numbers. There's quite high numbers at the moment on modified days. They are coming down, but we need to work better at it.
Councillor Thomas?
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered whether we're sort of communicating with our head teachers as to how they feel attendance should be handled. You know, what's our communication with them, please?
I think Andrew might want to add a little to this, but before I started in post, at Head Teacher Conference, I believe it was held in July, one of the one of the areas of significant discussion, and from what I'm led to believe a very frank and robust conversation, was how do you feel about attendance processes in a local authority? In your opinion, how could they be better? We want to work with you to understand, you know, a you said, we did approach. I think there were some quite frank messages in there that were taken on board. So that was the sort of first step of making sure that we're engaging with heads and listening to what they're saying. I think the strategy development process work, which is involved, I think we've got 4 secondary schools, some primary schools, and the PRU involved in the development of the strategy. So a kind of co-constructed approach, again, taking on board their advice. We're really keen to get the kind of guiding principles of the strategy from them. What is it that you want? What's the key thing? I mean, we all know that being in schools is the key thing, but underneath that, what does that actually look like for a child with a specific need? So we've really tried to work with them to make sure that their voice comes through in the strategy. In fact, I shared some materials with them last night for feedback in terms of the next step. You know, what does this look like? This is what we've got. What do you think is going to work for you? Share it with colleagues. Talk to your wider colleagues. I think the third big thing that we've been quite active with, myself and Andrew, since September. Well, not quite since September, but we've been out in schools. We've been out in schools listening to head teachers. Have things improved for you? What's your feedback? Tell us. What would you like us to do next? How can we provide you with a service that meets your needs, with a caveat of within the capacity that we've got? So it's just the act of engagement, being visible, you know, listening and being visible and responding in the same way that we want to work in that way.
Okay, Colette. Okay, we've spoken about clusters and the work with clusters. My question is that the transition between primary and secondary school represents a major change for pupils, and research shows that many can experience a slowing down of their progress. It is important for both primary and secondary school attendance policies to identify Year 6-7 pupils in particular need of support. Secondary schools and their feeder primaries need to work together to put in place arrangements to make the transition as smooth as possible. So my question is, how is attendance incorporated into the transition planning?
Again, I'll start. Andrew might want to add to this. I think we've said a couple of times already, one of the key things that we're actively encouraging schools to do is look at their cluster working. Curriculum for Wales, very exciting, a learning pathway from on entry in primary school all the way through to leaving at 16, and potentially even further, who knows. But we're looking at clusters developing learner pathways, a shared understanding of progression, so that expectations around what a child is doing when they're in Year 6 into Year 7, no duplication, all of that work really, really important around curriculum. But we'll also be encouraging schools to consider a cluster, as part of their transition work, a cluster policy around attendance. We've seen some good examples of that in other local authorities, and there's some real power in it. Again, just that consistency from a parent's point of view and a child's point of view, but a parent's as well, in terms of, well, I know that when my child progresses into secondary school, the approach is going to be essentially the same, because that's the agreed policy across the cluster. So it's really building on that, the power of the cluster. I think the Education Minister spoke about this in the summer term, around the real power that schools have is around that cluster work, and it really does cover lots of different areas beyond just the curriculum.
Cluster working is really variable across Torfaen. There are some clusters that are superb, and there are others that need to be better. What's really pleasing is that all clusters are engaged with a piece of work with Professor Mick Waters, looking at assessment planning in line with Curriculum for Wales. So that's work that will be developed over the next year. It started this autumn. But cluster working needs to be better. Yeah.
Vicky, you have the next question, question 27.
Thank you. So what types of targeted support and intervention are you referring to in 4.15, and how many families are taking up this offer of support?
I'll make a start. Andrew might want to add to this. In terms of working with individual schools, and then individual families, the EWOs are doing that on an individual basis where a specific need is. The engagement generally, I would say, is pretty good. Families are welcoming of it. I couldn't give you off the top of my head, and I wouldn't dream of doing this, of making up numbers or figures, but the general feedback is it's good, and they're welcoming of the support and the outreach that we're offering them. It's sometimes for parents where attendance is difficult, the additional support and capacity just by the sort of the independence of the EWO that they bring into that conversation can be really powerful. I had an example from just this week actually of an EWO attending a home offering some additional support, and it had an immediate effect. And I think as you draw into the cameos at the back of the report, it really sort of brings that to life. It explains the individualness of what goes on, and the multi-agency element as well, but ultimately how that then brings about the improvement in attendance for those children. It's what it isn't is a blanket approach. What it is an individual approach for each family in each circumstance. I think just making sure that we're very clear about that.
Thank you. You've somewhat answered my question, but I'll ask it. Other than the case studies that you've highlighted within the report, what has been the overall impact of the support provided to schools and young people?
Just so I'm clear, the overarching impact of the support.
How have we evaluated?
Yeah, so I mean, that's part of the process for this year has been to set team plans across all service areas. So every service area has got a team plan. Within the EWO team plan, it spells out some very clear success measures in terms of what the outcomes of that should look like in terms of impact. What we're in the process of doing at the moment is developing the evaluative framework linked to the local government inspection framework that will help us understand, okay, our intended purpose was this. Have we actually done it? Now, I can't give you that answer right now because we're in the process of doing that, but I'm sure that through Andrew and various cabinet reports, we'll be able to provide you with that information a bit further down the line. I think the soft intelligence would tell you that we've had some really good success stories, but in terms of capturing it in factual information at the moment, I wouldn't be able to, in a position to do that.
So, yeah, self-evaluation is a recommendation from the March inspection. We know it needs to be developed. What's really helpful, Estin have offered to come and work with us next month to deliver a workshop for all our team leaders to help develop our evaluative skills. We've agreed a framework of what we want to, how we want to approach it. As Andy said, we're aligning it to the local government education service inspection framework. It's now about skilling up officers to actually do that themselves independently. In terms of attendance, we are tracking individual schools' data monthly. We're looking at attendance codes. We're looking at the number of persistent absentees in each school on a monthly basis. We're also tracking how Education Welfare Service are instigating, withdrawing or following through on prosecutions. This is all new, so there's no comparative data at the moment. It's started this term. These are some of the data that we will use to evaluate impact, but a lot of it is about that individual child. That's why I think the case studies are so helpful, because one child is absolutely worth that investment. There's a huge amount of time and investment that takes place over a long period of time. That's really hard to capture in in one piece of data. We were in a school together the other week, and there's a child who's been on a part-time timetable. It's gone from 2 hours a day to half a day over the last half term. That's a huge increase for that child. You know, we're hoping they will be in full-time soon, but we can't show that in one piece of data.
No. But we have a bench.
It's a comment really rather than a question, but I think it really highlights what you've both been saying, the importance of both qualitative and quantitative data. And I don't think you can separate the two. And I think that's the best way of presenting how, in a sense, the quantitative data only sort of captures what's happening on the ground. So I think that the presenting both those areas of data, it's actually the same thing, but that balance is really important and really good.
And sorry, not to extend the point too much, but I think what we've tried to do, the Welsh Government released their new evaluation, improvement and accountability document back in the summer. It's not statutory yet, but the intention is to make it statutory. What we've tried to do with this report specifically is follow their lead, follow their advice, which is very much, yes, there's data, but don't be data-driven. Look beyond, consider the narrative, look at the quality of information. So it's lovely to hear you saying that you like both, because that's aligning to, I think, where we're moving with Welsh Government policy.
Yeah, I think I need to declare an interest. I'm a governor at Nant Celyn School before I ask the next question. Thank you. Are there adequate resources within our schools, especially primary, to help with attendance?
Yes. Okay, in short, it's a statutory responsibility of schools to effectively manage attendance. All the work we're talking about is additional tools around a self-evaluation audit, about the use of education welfare officers, multi-agency working. They're all tools. It has to be effectively coordinated by the school, because they own that learner. If there are individual cases where you think that's not the place, let us know, because we will address it with that individual school. It's the school's responsibility.
To hear the final question, 30. We've given you a bit of a ribbing this morning, so Councillor Jones.
I was just going to say the same thing. What is the current trigger point for liaising with parents on low attendance? Is there effective communication between schools and parents, please?
Yeah, so in the Strive framework, very similar to how it looked in Strive 95, there's the immediate one-day response. So if the child isn't absent and no reason is given, the school make contact with parents, as I mentioned before. If there's a 3-day continuation of that, then the EWO will get involved. Now, we do have a framework that takes through various letters and conversations and meetings. One of the comments that came from our head teachers steering group and also the consultation in the summer term was that could be perceived to be quite a long-winded process. So one of the key things that we've taken away from that is to modify the process to make it a needs basis. Again, it's all about the individual. I've said this a lot today, but if there is a significant concern with a particular child, we can escalate processes accordingly. We can deploy additional resource. It does mean pulling away from other situations potentially, but if the need requires it, we'll do that. But the most important part is the relationship between the school and the EWO and the other services and going forward with that. So being active and being present in schools, being visible, which again we've tried to be as much as we can since September, and feedback from schools has been very positive around that. That for me is the way forward with this. It's that together needs-based response with the capacity that we've got.
That's really pleasing to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thought you had the last question. Councillor Alfie Best has got a question. If any other members have got any arguing questions, queries, then now's the time to raise your hand. So Alfie Best.
Yeah, sorry, I did have one more question. I was wondering, how can illness be taken into account when compiling data? So if there's a specific time of year where illness is really high and lots of children are off, or if there's a year where there is a really high rate of flu, how is that compared against previous years? And also throughout the year, could attendance campaigning be more targeted for times closer to the holidays, whereas good hygiene campaigns could be used in flu season?
Okay, so on the illness aspect, so if a child is absent for illness, it's an I code that's used. It's a specific authorised absence. So one of the things we are starting now is a better tracking of the use of individual attendance codes by individual schools and trends throughout the year. Again, if there's a high instance of an I code within a school, when the EWO goes in and reviews the attendance, that will be flagged up. So that will be a conversation point. It could be there was a case of norovirus that knocked out a class, and that's why there's so many absences. Where there's anomalies compared to the overall trend, that's where it prompts a conversation. And schools will often phone us and just say, I've got 6 staff off, they've got COVID, we've lost half the class, it's really difficult. They're really proactive in those sort of conversations because often they're struggling to manage the school in that case. Yeah. But where we're not aware of that, again, the data would prompt a conversation. In terms of the attendance campaign, I'll hand over to Louise.
Again, we will, follow Andy and Andrew's advice, really. I mean, from our point of view, we are trying to incentivise schools. We are starting the narrative that going to school is important, but there's also lots of advantages to going into school. So we're starting the narrative. We're trying to incentivise schools to continue those narratives within their own schools. I mean, you may have, a school where they have a really strong sporting tradition, for example, and that might be something they want to focus on as a benefit of regularly attending their school. There are others with amazing drama facilities, for example. So we're hoping to start the narrative so that narrative can then be continued and adapted to specific campaigns. So, for example, after the end of this one, after the Easter holidays, guided by the education welfare team, they may want us to do something particularly bespoke around, limiting the amount of times you go on holiday during the school year, for example. So, we can amend it based on what we're asked to do at different points of the year, but the core narrative will stay the same. There's lots of benefits of regularly going to school.
Yeah, thank you. Just building on what Louisa said there, and our engagement to inform that will be driven by schools. The steering groups will inform us of what schools need, because again, they're the service, they're the people who get the service. We need to be driven by what their need is, so we'll take it through that process.
More, Councillor Cowles.
Thank you, Chair. I just need to declare an interest before I ask this question as Governor of Blenavon Heritage School and Governor of Aberystwyth Comprehensive School. But when I was in school, which was granted 14 years ago now, but we used to have form classes, used to have sort of traffic light competitions where you'd either be in the green or the amber or the red, depending on your attendance for a term. And so the best form class then used to have an incentive and a prize, sort of a cinema trip or even a trip to McDonald's as a second prize or something like that. And I was just wondering if you knew whether that was still, things like that, incentives and competitions for best incentives, was still commonplace within schools.
The trip to McDonald's, it sounds...
It was the pre-Jamie Oliver days, I think.
Yes, is the simple answer. Yeah, we've seen schools in Torvine in the last month where they've got various different strategies, competitions, whatever it might be, running. Going back to Louise's point, though, I think rather than, at the moment at least, rather than aim for a ceiling, thinking about just improvement. Are we seeing improvement? We are seeing improvement. So we want to maintain that momentum around improvement. then I think that we can start looking at endpoints. Go on, Liz.
My son's on a cinema trip currently for good attendance at Westmont.
Yeah,
so he went to school back
it's still
yesterday.
happening.
But is he being
Thank
back
you.
absent?
Well, I hope not, because he's currently 100%.
Yeah. Okay, that concludes our questions for today. So thanks very much for your contribution, and can I ask you now to leave while members consider their recommendations? Thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, so that was a bit of a grilling this morning, wasn't it? But it was very good questions and very interesting and a very important subject, I feel. So I'd like to remind members now that we've been asked to scrutinise and consider the recommendations that have come out of that scrutiny meeting. Members have been asked to support the Not In Miss Out campaign. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Assess whether the actions being taken are appropriate in supporting improvement in school attendance, and to note the comments made by the Minister of Education and Welsh Language in relation to fixed penalty notices in exceptional circumstances, and to make comments and recommendations to the executive member where appropriate. So I'm asking now, do members have any recommendations specific that they would like to make on the report?
What Councillor Williams said about notification and identification on the young carers. I think that's very important.
One was the tracking the use of the code with Welsh Government having so many.
And supporting schools.
Yeah.
Schools,
Yeah.
Could we, I wonder if it would be useful as well to have regular feedback on how well the cluster working is, because that, oh, there we are. We are as one, because that clearly is really key, and clearly there's quite a lot of that it's recognised. So it would be really useful, I think, for us to track the progress of how that's working.
Yeah, that encourage the cluster development, and especially after the Estin training that they're bringing in next month as well. So yeah, I think that would be useful. Janet.
The question I asked about specific groups, and you said there were real demographics with the poorer, deprived children going in. I think it's notable that perhaps we keep a record of that and how that situation is improving. Because he said, the travellers, etc. Yeah.
I think you've captured everything. The only thing I would put in, which you welcomed, was to Andy Rothwell offered to share and consult with members on the attendance strategy once developed and completed. So I think that's quite important, just for me, myself, really, to keep on the radar for your work programme for next year. Yes. Absolutely.
There was also a mention of the Wellbeing Forum within our schools, and I think perhaps if we can, obtain our information about that, if there's anything specific that comes up within their agenda.
This campaign is supposed to be for 5 months till Easter. Would it be nice to keep on record and have a feedback of the improvement up until this has been achieved at Easter?
Yeah. I think potentially that would be part of the attendance strategy, I would imagine, going forward. So you can reflect back on, right, you said this in November, how far have we come, what's the impact so far, that sort of thing.
Vicky, you've got a recommendation?
Yeah, it was noted that they said that there's no data on bullying, and with bullying being one of the main indicators of consistent absenteeism, I'm wondering if there's a recommendation there about getting some data and monitoring the data and making links to the persistent absenteeism.
There's also concern that schools were a bit reluctant to report the bullying as well because they were being marked down as being a bullying.
That was bullying, isn't it?
Yes, yes, yes. So I think there might be a question around that.
Similar to Kira,
Yeah.
really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Identifying the
And the
issue.
young carers as well, that's right, yeah.
Yeah.
There's clearly a few groups, aren't there, that we're quite that we're young carers being one of them, and absenteeism specifically related to bullying. I wonder if rather than an action specifically about young carers, but I think that's really important, is to look at, I mean, would there be any other particular groups that we would be interested in tracking? Because there are lots of different groups. You can't track every single one, because like they were saying, it drills down to in the end to the individual family and child. But
I think there's also a recommendation on getting consistency across all our schools, because of, you know, what might work well in one school is not taken forward in another school. And if there was that consistency
in relation to what?
Of the attendance policy, the bullying policies, all governing bodies receive the policies, but whether or not they act on them and what consistency there is another thing. I think I can give an example of deprivation, really, of a child not having the right shoes to come into school and that child being sent home. But bearing in mind, that child had been out of school for 14 days because he hadn't been in school, because he didn't have the shoes. But when he came into school with the wrong shoes, he was then sent home because of the uniform policy. So it's a consistency that I mean, the officers are right. They know, the teachers and head teachers know their schools best and how to deal with a specific student or pupil. But it's a consistency that is needed. So it won't happen in one school and not in another. It needs that kind of consistency. Any other questions from anyone?
I have a question, Chair. I'm just wondering about the rise in the number of parents who decide to educate their children at home. There seems to be a massive rise on that. Just wondered, are we looking into that? What are the reasons? Or
because he said it had gone up.
Is that,
it was 113, it went up to 193.
And 53.
Is it the same in all authorities, or are we just sort of an outlier on that? Thanks.
That's a good point. Yeah. And safeguarding is a big issue as well, isn't it? Those, how are we managing, and it might be a crossover with committees of safeguarding our children being at home.
Yeah, that could come up under health as well.
Yeah. Okay. Are we happy with those recommendations? Okay. Everybody happy? Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
So, may I invite Leanne to go through the work programme, please? Members confirm that they have any questions or whether they are happy to proceed with the next item on the work programme, which is school improvement. I think we have a recommendation because we've been contacted. Is that the next meeting, Leanne?
We have.
With ALN. So Tracy Peed is back in the authority with ALN, and as ALN was one of the recommendations within the Eston report and the work for the PM. So over to Leanne.
Absolutely, thank you, Chair. Just the short standard report from me so that you as a committee can make a collective decision on what item you want to take forward next. Appendix 1 sets out the items that you selected within your visioning session in July. I've put some tick marks against what you've scrutinised already and what's up and coming. If I go on to the exec
forward plan then. As you can see, there are no key decisions required to be made or identified by the service area at this present time. And then we've got audit committee referrals, which you're well aware for us, for our committee, relates to the Essen inspection and all the recommendations that they've previously made, which have already been selected on your work programme. I just wanted to draw to your attention that at the time of collating the information for this report last week or the week before, that was the situation then. However, I've been approached by Tracy Peed, as the chair has outlined, requesting that the additional learning needs post-inspection action plan Essen recommendation 4, which was due to be looked at the 16th of March, and the school improvement post-inspection action plan Essen recommendation 1, she's requested and asked if we could potentially swap those items around. The reason being, she's written a ALN strategy which she wants to push through to Cabinet pretty quickly, and she feels that it would sit nicely with that recommendation 4 with Essen. We could do it combined. So if members are okay with that decision, the next meeting now, the 2nd of February, will be on ALN, and then preceding that, the 16th of March, will be school improvement. So just to ask your permission, really, and to say that you're happy.
Yeah. Is everybody happy to swap those two items around? Yeah, I don't see any consent there, so thank you very much for that. Thank you, Leanne. Takes us to agenda item number 7, which is the date and time of the next meeting, which we've just mentioned. Mary members, our next meeting is scheduled for the 2nd of February 2023. Oh, goodness me.
That's scary. Which seems a long way away, but I'm sure it'll soon be upon us.
So that takes us to agenda item 8. As the chair of the committee, may I thank members and officers for their ongoing support and contributions to our meeting. I felt that was a very good meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance. I now close the meeting.